Good
Good morning. So we're back to our usual setup in terms of the filming. I know that you guys like the filming where you can see my face. Like I said, still trying to get that webcam so that it at least shows up on the recording. I'll get that as soon as possible and I'll get that going for you. In the meantime, we're going to continue from where we left off. Last time we were together, that was last week sometime. Oh my goodness. We were solving quadratics with the zero product property. We had to factor these things first. So let's recall zero product property. That's the thing that said if I had stuff multiplied together equal to zero, then each of the things being multiplied can be zero. And so we're going to solve this with the zero product property. It requires me to factor, but before I factor, I have to make sure that the equation equals zero. Does it?
No.
So I need to make it that way. What do I do to get it to equal zero? Minus 4. I need to get rid of that 4 so that it turns into a 0. So I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides. And my equation becomes...
Why didn't you subtract it from the 2x squared?
I love that question. Why did I not subtract the 4 from the 2x squared? Because they're not like terms.
Oh, why did you?
The 2 is an x squared term. The 4 is just a 4. And I didn't subtract it from the 7x for the same reason.
So you just subtracted it?
Isn't it like a constant or something?
I didn't subtract it from the x. I gave it its own column.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I didn't do much of anything at all. I just new column because it's not a like term to anything. All right, continuing to factor, going to take a times c and multiply them together. 2 times negative 4 is negative 8. All the factor pairs of negative 8, and I'm looking for the factor pair that adds to give me a positive 7. And as soon as you see that factor pair, you can tell me to stop and use that one. Stop. Where's my factor pair? How'd I get the negative 8? I took 2 times negative 4. What was the factor pair for positive 7? Negative 1 and positive 8. Right there. So I'm going to replace the 7x with a negative 1x, bless you, and a positive 8x. Everything else about my equation is staying exactly the same, including the equals 0. Next step, going to create my groups. Remember, my groups have a plus sign between them. The plus 0 remains the same. And then in each group, I'm going to put 2 things. I'm just going to go in order because that's the easiest to think about. Now I'm going to look at each group separately and try to find those common factors. I'm going to look at the first group first, and I'm going to look at all the things that multiply together to give me each term within that group. They're all my factors, and these are the factors that they have in common. So I'm going to write that common factor outside, and then in parentheses, I'm writing what's left over, what they do not have in common. I'm done with that group, so I'm going to put my plus sign. That's this plus sign here. Don't worry, that plus sign will disappear in the next line. And now I'm going to find factor pairs, but I'm going to borrow these factors first. And I'm going to go, okay, what do I need to multiply to 2x to give me 8x? I'm going to borrow this factor. And now I'm going to think, what do I need to multiply to negative 1 to give me negative 4? And now I can see my common factor. I did it that way because it creates a situation where the leftovers are an exact match to the leftovers from the previous group. Now these are what those 2 terms have in common, and I can write them down and then open parentheses filled with what was left over from those 2. This 4 came from right here. Now that it's factored, we have the setup for the zero product property. Two things being multiplied together equals 0. Let me say that each of the things being multiplied are 0. I'm going to solve each of those equations for x. And fractions as answers are completely okay in this section. Right, coming back to you? A little bit? All right. So I'm sure a few of you are sitting here staring at this and going, gosh, I wish there was an easier way. There is. But before we can get to the easier way to do this, we need to stop a moment and talk about the square root property. The square root property tells you, it is the method to saying, how do I get rid of square powers? How do you get rid of square powers?
I
To
don't
undo
know.
a square power, you take the square root,
Oh yeah, you don't you get the square root of the to get rid of the b.
which is exactly what this says.
Oh, okay.
This says something squared equals a number. Then the something is the plus or minus square root of that number. That's the square root property, and we're going to use that to solve these equations for x. I got stuff squared equals number. The stuff equals the plus or minus version of the square root of the number. Didn't think. I just filled in from my equation.
So only the thing that, like the 25, like anything.
Anything
on
that's
the
over
right
there
side of the
on the
equal
equals.
sign. Oh.
The only thing that you have to make sure of is that the squared thing is by itself. I don't care what's inside the squared thing, but the square thing has to be alone.
So
to be
like,
able
what
to
if
use
like
this.
what if it just had like a x on the inside, or like a -7, and like the exponent was like for something else.
You mean like this?
Yeah.
I need to get the 7 out of the way.
Oh, okay.
Notice how the 7 now isn't part of the squared stuff? I want the squared stuff by itself. So in this case, I have to move the not squared stuff. And then I could apply my square root property. Okay. Look at this other example. What's in the way?
The 4.
The 4. The 4 is not inside the squared stuff. So I have to get rid of it. What's happening between the 4 and the squared stuff?
It's getting
What is it?
Yeah, it's being multiplied.
Yeah.
So how do you get rid of multiplication?
You divide
Division. What am I dividing by?
the x plus 3.
The 4,
The
because
4.
the 4 is what's being multiplied. So they cancel each other out.
I forgot the word, but do you distribute? They distribute.
No, you don't distribute there.
No, like with the 4, and then like before you divide it, like I was gonna say it, but I forgot the word.
Okay, so let me address that real quick while you guys are jotting this down. You're talking, and I saw this happen a couple times on the quiz as well. This.
Yeah.
You can't do this. There's an exponent in the way.
Oh.
The only time you can distribute is when the parentheses do not have an exponent. Parentheses has an exponent that you can see. You can't distribute yet.
How do you get rid of it?
Great question. So if you had this, what would you do? Yes?
White out the 2.
Just white it out. I love that answer. No. No. It's very creative, but no. So this means multiply this group to itself 2 times, yes?
So it would be equal to its name.
And now I can distribute. And I've got choices of what I'm distributing first. I can either distribute into the first 2 first, or I could distribute into the second 2 first. It doesn't matter, it gets you the same thing. I like distributing here first. And then I use my FOIL method to distribute these 2. Okay? But don't distribute into the parentheses first if the parentheses has a power on it. a visible power that you can see.
I've done that a lot, like the past few years.
Yeah, please don't. I noticed. Don't do this. No. All right. So we're okay with this. Shall we finish these out so we can figure out what our solutions are? What our x equals are? Okay, so let's look at this one. We're trying to solve this. It looks weird because we've got a plus or minus hanging out, so we're going to write it as two different equations. We're going to write one equation where we're looking at the positive version of the square root of 25, and then another equation where we're looking at the negative version of the square root of 25. Well, what is the square root of 25? And so this equation is actually x minus 7 plus 5 equals 5. And when I solve for it, I get x equals 12. Whereas the equation on the right-hand side, the one that's my negative version, becomes x minus 7 equals negative 5. Adding 7 to both sides again, x equals 2. Two answers.
So just because of the sign,
Mhm.
be like totally different
Yep.
answers.
Yep. Looking at this one, I have x squared equals 32. Square root property says that I can do this. And so I'm looking at the positive and negative versions of the square root of 32.
Wait, miss, it's just you put the sign there just because like you didn't have spaces.
Okay, so I had two versions. I ran out of room to write them side by side.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I would have to figure this one out, and I would have to figure this one out, and I would have two answers. Shall I look at this one? I have the squared stuff by itself. Take the square root. I can either write it as my two equations, or I can go, what's the square root of 16? 4. So I like doing that first, so that's my equation. And now I have to write it both different ways. Once where I'm looking at the positive version of the results, and once where I'm looking at the negative version of the results. Solve each of these for x. Done.
Oh, what the heck? That was fast.
Easy enough? Let's play with our daily work. You asked for number 7 first. Number 7, hot mess. All right, I have an x term, yes? I don't have a single stuff squared. Because I have stuff squared and then I have stuff. And I don't yet have a way to turn it into stuff squared, right? Haven't shown you that. That's our next section. So this is a zero product property. I need one side to be 0. I like making this right side 0 just because it seems to go faster. Okay. Here we go, just kind of cleaning up. This right side now is 0, which is what I wanted. The left side is this. Factor it. You are getting much, much better at doing the factoring. You had an example of that on your notes today, and we've done it over the past several days worth of work. So on your homework assignment, you will do your factoring work, whatever method that is, you will do it here. For this question, once you've done your factoring work, that should be the result. Which then I can use zero product property in order to write these two equations, which then are very easy for me to solve. Hopefully they're easy for you to solve too. The direction said solve, which means I want x equals number. Do I have x equals number? Do I have two of them? And I know I want two. Yes?
Sabrina Castañeda, she's going home.
Thank you. I know I need two answers because my degree of my polynomial is 2, so I'm expecting two answers. When you're ready, join me on the next page. You asked for 16. Hope you feel better, sweetheart. Have a good one. All right, looking at this one.
It's a big one.
Yeah. I noticed that I only have stuff squared. Okay, I have an x squared, I don't have an x also, which means I don't need to factor this. I could if I wanted to. Y'all had some of that where, you know, it looks like this. And I said, oh, just throw in there a 0x. Remember that? Now, here's your shortcut. Now you don't have to do that. Here's what you get to do instead of throwing in that 0x. Get the x squared term by itself. Then divide by whatever coefficients you might see. Gonna need help with numbers here.
311.
And now I get to take the square root. Now the question is, can I simplify 311? The answer is, I don't know. I'm gonna have to go figure that out. We'll do that together. But if I can, I must. So you have to go through and check. Okay? Alright, so I'm gonna look at factors of 311.
1 and 311.
1 and 311, okay. That's not really gonna help me. I want numbers that change. It's not divisible by 2. I don't think it's divisible by 3, but someone check it out. Go 311 divided by 3. Do you get a whole number? No, okay, so it's not divisible by 3. It's not divisible by 4, and not by 5. And I know it's not divisible by 5 because it doesn't end in a 0 or 5. It's not divisible by 6 because in order for it to be divisible by 6, I'd have to be able to divide it by 2 and by 3. But I can't divide it by 2 or by 3, so not by 6 either. What about 7? No? Not by 8, not by 9, not by 10, by 11? Not by 12, 13? No. You know what? We're starting to get big enough numbers that we suspect this thing can't be divided by anything. So, you know what?
It's not a whole number.
Yeah, it's not a prime, it's not a composite, it's a prime, and so these are my answers and I'm done. Yes, this thing counts as 2 answers. Ladies. This,
Carranza?
yes?
Can you send Antonio Rodriguez to the Go Center for a few minutes?
Thank you.
Give it.
This item right here, ladies, this counts as 2 answers. Okay? Alright. I'm sorry? The negative and positive, yeah, because it said plus or minus. So you're automatically putting 2 answers in there. Alright, turn the page. I was asked for this one, number 24, because it was a big number, and oh my god, and there's a negative, what do I do? You relax and remember that the square root of -1 can be replaced with the letter I. For imaginary. Worst name ever. Please invent the time machine and fix it. Thank you. Alright, I'm going to rewrite -108 as -1 times 108. I'm doing that rewriting because I can break radicals at multiplications, but only if they're all multiplications. And now I can replace that square root of -1 with I. And already that looks a little better because I no longer have a negative inside of a radical. But now I've got to see if I can break up 108. Exactly like what I did to see if I could break up 311, I'm going to do that to 108. 108 I know is divisible by 2 because it's an even number, so it's 2 divided by 54. 54 is also an even number, so I know I can break that up. 27. I have my first pair. I'm going to keep going though because I suspect that 27 can be multiplied by two things. 3, 9 times 3, okay. Now, I'm going to continue because I don't have any more pairs and I know that I can rewrite 9 as two things multiplied, 3 and 3. I have just found all of the prime factors for the number 108. You are welcome to use this technique if it helps you, especially when you're looking at the bigger numbers. Circle my pairs.
Why do you put 2 times 2? What did you use
That's a fantastic question because I was looking for pairs. And if I had written a 4, I wouldn't have seen that it was a pair of 2s. Yeah, no, it's a great question. Thank you. Okay, so looking at this, I have a pair of 2s, so I'm going to write my I. And then outside, I'm going to write that I had a pair of 2s and I had a pair of 3s. And then in my radical, I'm going to write the thing that was left without a pair. Forever alone. Me at prom. I'm done essentially, except that this looks a little messy. So in order to clean it up, I'm going to look at numbers outside of the radical and I'm going to multiply those together. I'm going to look at numbers inside the radical and multiply those together, but I'm not going to allow the numbers outside going to prom, multiply the numbers inside, hanging out, reading a book. Right? And I'm going to put the letter at the very back because I don't know why. Numbers go in the back for some reason. And we're done. Questions?
No, ma'am.
All right, thanks.